Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we have a chance to take a look at a really unusual and really cool forgotten shotgun. This is a Neostead 2000, designed by South African designer Tony Neophytou in about the mid-1990s. This was a project that he spent about 5 years on. Ultimately, it transferred ownership, and around the early 2000s, a batch of these were actually made for the commercial market, but only about 200 of them. And that, I think, has led to a lot of widespread misunderstanding about this gun and just lack of information on it. The original idea was to come up with something cool and different and new. And specifically, what that was, that took the form of twin magazine tubes on a pump-action shotgun, giving it a capacity of 12 plus 1, 13 rounds, or if you had short ammunition, even more than that, in a bullpup, a very compact bullpup style of shotgun. A really cool concept. In addition, it's also notable for having this rather unusual forward pumping action. There's good reason for that, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, the downside to this shotgun was that it is really remarkably complex inside. The design is really cool, but it's not really the most practical thing for manufacture or for actual extended use. So that's the main reason why these were never made in large numbers. They're just too complex inside. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at what this does and how it does it. So obviously the most distinctive thing is the fact that this is a bullpup configuration, and it's a really bullpup configuration. The barrel obviously goes from the muzzle out there to literally here. The end of the barrel is right there. So this is as much barrel as you could possibly get in the overall length of the gun. That's really impressive. Now, the magazine system is, of course, the next most distinctive thing. 2 tubes. We have this latch to open it, and we also have a selector lever here. So by pulling this selector lever to one side or the other, you can set the gun to only feed from one magazine tube. So if I push it to the right, it will only feed from the left side tube and vice versa. If you have the magazine selector in the middle, it will alternate one tube and then the other until both are empty, or in fact until even one of the tubes is empty. If you have this set in the middle, but only one tube is loaded, it will feed from that one tube as long as it has ammunition. Now, we'll pull this back, and that allows the magazine tubes to lift up. They're on the steel strut here. That is in fact powered by this big simple flat spring right there. Once we have this open, you can see there are a couple of white plastic followers in there, and that the fact that they don't come all the way to the end is deliberate. That's as far in as they're supposed to go. And we can load the gun by, we'll switch this to open up this tube, push in our cartridges, and make sure that they snap over this little retainer here. So we can push that in, then we'll swap it to that side, put one in the other side, and now you can see that one is right at the end of the tube and the other is slightly recessed. And this one would feed right now if we were operating the gun. And by pushing this in, we can swap it to this tube. We have a little lever right here that moves back and forth each time the gun feeds, and that's what controls which tube is being fed. One of the other cool features here is that you don't have to cycle ammo through the gun in order to unload it. There is this button right here, the little shark fin looking guy. This allows you to empty both magazine tubes simultaneously. So I'm just going to hold the magazine tubes up, and it's a little harder when you're trying to hold it for the camera. There we go, and it will dump the contents of both tubes. Now the next unusual feature here is the pump handle and the fact that it moves forward instead of back. There is a release lever, a release button, right up here in the front that unlocks it, and even this has this cool, rather complicated mechanism in it that we'll take a look at in a moment, where the recoil of firing unlocks this for you. So you don't have to do it manually except for the very first time. Push that in, and the handle runs forward, and what you are actually doing is pulling the entire barrel forward with the handle. So if we look underneath it here, that's the barrel right there, and it actually moves forward and back. Now, the reason why this is set up to pump in the opposite direction we would expect is pretty clever. It's actually a safety issue. So if you're familiar with the KelTec KSG, which is, which is a shotgun that is completely different mechanically, but very similar in concept, the idea of a pump action with 2 magazine tubes and 1 barrel. But again, it works completely differently. However, the problem that the KelTec is known for is one of safety. And that is because it's a bullpup, your hand is right at the muzzle when you're firing. And on the KelTec, you pull the handle back to open it and forward to close it. And there have been a number of people who have managed to pull their hand a little bit too far forward and muzzled their own hand while they were firing the gun. And that's a really bad thing to do. On the Neostead, because you pump forward first, there's no danger here because the thing's opening. And when you close it, you're pulling your hand back away from the muzzle, and it negates the possibility of accidentally shooting your own fingers off, which is a really good thing. Now, a couple last things before we take this apart. First off, this was designed to be entirely ambidextrous, so the front sling swivel is here in the middle. There's a little piece of Picatinny rail for a light or a laser on there. The sights are on this elevated handle, and it's actually a ghost ring sight, really wide fixed polymer front blade, and an adjustable rear aperture. Note that the magazine release and the lever are both ambidextrous. The safety is located in front of the trigger, in the middle, also ambidextrous. So push forward for safe, pull back to fire. And then the rear sling swivel is mounted on both sides of the stock. So left or right-handed, you can pick whichever position you would like the sling installed on. So literally everything on this gun is completely ambidextrous. In case it wasn't obvious already, it does eject out the bottom. So the process of cycling starts, of course, with a shotgun shell in one of your 2 magazine tubes. And when you open the slide, one of these shells is released, whichever one's basically in line to be released next. And the shell is going to pop backwards, right, like in here. You'll notice, of course, it's not centered because there are 2 magazine tubes. So on the stock, you can see these 2 bulges in the side. These are actually basically feed ramps. Those are there to take a cartridge coming off one side and slide it into the centerline position in the action. That is going to start to push the shell back to basically this position. Now, while you're doing that, the slide's going forward, so the barrel's moving forward. This is, well, a combination of things. This is going to slide forward as well, and you'll notice we have a little platform that's coming out right here and right here. Right there. These are actually, these will function as your ejectors. However, they're also the platform that a cartridge sits on, like this. So this system has to hold the shell stably in position, prevent it from moving up, down, side to side, anywhere, really. And sitting on that platform is actually pretty darn stable. However, it gets better because this is tripped and drops down, and that puts a lot of pressure on the cartridge as well. So once it's in this position, that's really firmly held in place. And it's now in line for the barrel to close around it. The barrel is going to come back like that, close around the shell, and then lock into battery. Now, I'm not going to close it all the way because that's a live round, so we will pop that back open. The one other thing I can show you is when that barrel closes all the way, it's going to lift this lever back up. So when the lever's down like that, we're going to have a little bar come up right here, and that's actually on both sides of the gun. So right there, that pushes this paddle back up into position. Now we have a trigger up here, and when you pull the trigger, you're actually pulling this entire lever forwards, so like that. And then there's a hook up into here that hits a sear. This is actually yet another interesting detail that we'll get to in a minute. It actually the hammer fires forward, or fires backward instead of forward. We'll touch on that in a moment. One additional safety in there is this bar, which pushes backwards. This prevents the trigger from being pulled unless this bar is pushed backward. And what pushes that bar backward is the slide being all the way in the rearward position. So this ensures that the gun can't be fired out of battery. So the next step in disassembly is to remove the handguard. So I have loosened up all of these screws. We can drop the screws into it now. This is just a molded plastic handguard, but there are two important elements built into the handguard. So this one up here is the slide latch, and it's got a screw in it there. This actually has a little spring-loaded recoiling weight, and that's what disconnects this latch when you fire. So if it's not automatically disconnected, then you have to get in there and push it manually to unlock the slide. What's more important here is this guy. This is the locking block. One of the things that's really unusual about this shotgun is that the locking system is here, right in front of the trigger. Because it's the barrel that's moving and not the bolt, the locking mechanism can be anywhere on this receiver tube. So we have a locking block here that is going to drop in front of this locking surface on the barrel. So right there, and with that down, it's now locked in battery, and I can't free the barrel. I have to lift that up, and then the barrel can cycle forward and back. Now that is done by this little guy. So this has a pivoting link that connects to the barrel. So this pivot sits in this track. You can see where it attaches to the barrel right there. Right there. Okay, have to get it the right way around. So that sits there, and it cycles with the barrel. So this is what's actually pulling the barrel back and forth. And then it has two sets of cams on it here. This top cam is what forces the locking wedge, or the locking lug, towards the barrel. You can see that it's angled a little bit, and that's what locks the gun when this is all the way in. And then the two hooks on the outside, you can see they're angled the other way, and they force the locking wedge up and out of battery when you pull the slide forward. Now the reason for this pivoting link is because this thing is pushing the barrel back, it actually has to push the barrel kind of in advance of itself, because the barrel has to be all the way fully back before it starts to lock, which don't think about that too hard. It's basically just a matter of if the locking surfaces aren't aligned up, you can't push the locking block into position. So the idea here is that this pivoting link allows the barrel to travel with this locking block here until about this point, and then the pivoting link starts going sideways, which allows this block to stay in position a little bit longer while the barrel moves up, and then it locks. Hopefully that made some modicum of sense. So locked, pull the block down, and unlocked. And you can see the locking block right there. Unlocked, locked. So normally people think that the locking lugs have to be on the bolt, because it's on the normal gun, it's always the bolt that's moving. Well, on the Neostead, the bolt is actually pinned into place. In fact, it's this pin that holds the breech block in place, and the barrel moves. So you don't need locking lugs on the bolt, because it's not going anywhere. That's its locking lug. What you need is a locking lug to hold the barrel to this receiver tube, and that can be anywhere along the length of the barrel. Now, one other cool, just like random piece of trivia here. This is a tubular receiver, and it's fairly large in diameter back here, and then it necks down right here to where, you know, the only thing inside it going forward is the barrel. The way they actually made this was to take pre-made chromoly tube in a forging machine, and they actually hammered it into a smaller diameter, almost like you would make a barrel, which is really quite, it's an interesting way to have manufactured this piece. On a similar note, the barrel was also kind of made in the same way. When these were being manufactured in South Africa, the problem was barrel blanks were really expensive. And by the time you had by the time you'd purchased a barrel blank, they'd cut, a proper 12 gauge chamber in it and cut it to the right outside diameter or outside profile and gotten the locking surfaces on it and all of that. The barrel was like 10% the retail cost of the gun, which is far too expensive. So what they ended up doing was actually taking, again, chromoly tube, and they didn't cut or ream the chamber into it. They actually swaged the chamber. And if you're not familiar with that process, swaging is basically just forcing one piece of metal against another until something gives and the metal squishes and changes shape. On the light end, this is like reforming a cartridge case for the reloading process. You're going to swage it back down to size. It's expanded when it fires. You're going to squish it back down. The negative of that, the reverse of that, is how they made the chambers in these things. Take a blank that's the shape of a 12 gauge shell and just jam it into the chamber end of the barrel with enough force that it forms a void the size of that 12 gauge shell. So really a couple of very unusual manufacturing processes made necessary by simply the cost and difficulty of getting the right specific materials. All right, it is time to do some shooting. Now, the keen-eyed amongst you may notice that this is not the same gun that we've just been taking apart. This does not have the little button for the stock disassembly on it. This is actually the #2 prototype of the Neostead. And the reason we're shooting this one is because that one that we were just taking apart it's basically unfired, and the stocks on the production guns are known to be rather fragile, and they tend to crack and break. And so we don't want to break that one. So we're going to shoot this prototype that's had a lot of ammo through it and should run pretty well. Now, there are a few little bits of the mechanism that are different, like the disassembly, but it should shoot just the same. So the first step is to load it. We're going to take the button here, push it back. That's going to lift up the two tubes, set that to one particular side, and put in a couple of rounds. This was originally designed to hold 6 full-length shells on each side. 3 on that side. 2, 3 there. We put the selector in the center, which means it's going to alternate which magazine tube it uses with each shot. You'll notice if I push this in, that one pops down, and vice versa. So that's what it's actually doing when we're shooting. Lock that in place, and now we're ready to go. So the key to this, as with many manually operated shotguns, especially more complicated ones, is to operate the thing briskly and with purpose. The worst thing you can do with this is short stroke it, because that leaves you with 2 rounds, both trying to feed simultaneously, and then you have to take the whole gun apart to fix it. So we will start by hitting the release button. That release button, as you saw, is automatically activated when you fire, just by the recoil of firing. But for the first shot, we have to do it manually, and away we go. So this is actually a really pleasant gun to shoot. The recoil is fairly soft. It's a fairly heavy gun, which is almost certainly why it's really quite nice to shoot. The barrel is really quite low in the action. It doesn't rise on firing. The only downside to it is the little selector lever here that allows you to switch to only use one tube at a time. If you put your face too far forward on the gun, that will recoil into your cheek, and that's a little unpleasant. So if that starts hitting you, then you go, oh, and go from this sort of thing, which is bad, back to here. Well, I have been told that I have to finish out the box of ammo that we started. So we had about half a box left, which is 12 rounds, which is conveniently the exact capacity of this shotgun. I'll tell you what, it definitely gets a little bit heavier when you have half a box of ammo in it. But let's go ahead and empty those out. Oh no! All right, so this is a slightly different malfunction. All right, so what happened there is the shell was just slightly misaligned, and when I went to close the barrel on it, instead of chambering nicely, it kind of smushed. So we're actually able to fix that without too much trouble. But this is caused by that panel, that flapper at the top of the action that holds the cartridges in control. And as there are, with variations in weight and length of construction of the shells, occasionally you'll get problems like that. And that's it for the Neostead 2000. Thanks you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was fantastic to get a chance to take a look at not one, but two of these really, in the United States, unicorn shotguns. So hopefully you now have a better idea of what the original intent was, how they actually work, which I don't think anybody really understands, and why they were so limited in application. Thanks for watching.